Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be crafting with you today. We are going to be making some adorable watercolor hearts. They're perfect for Valentine notes. You can do little messages on the back if you want to. We'll be adding things like glitter or sequins. You can also use just markers or colored pencils afterward if you want to do extra little details or designs. So I'm going to go through all the supplies we're going to use, and then we'll get started. So firstly, we are using Creatology watercolor paint. You could use other types of paint if you didn't have watercolor, but it's definitely going to look different. So we're going to go through how to like mix watercolors today. So with that, we'll need paintbrushes, and I have a little jar of water here. And then either napkins or paper towel. I like reuse little cloths, and so you can use that as well to kind of dry your brush off in between colors. And then I'm using Creatology watercolor paper. And this paper, we'll pull it out of here, but it's a little bit thicker and it absorbs the water really well and doesn't like tear the paper, things like that. So that's the benefit of using a watercolor paper, but you could use any sort of construction paper as well. If you use like notebook paper or something that's really thin, it might start to tear your paper. It can the water will kind of push through the paper really easily. So I do recommend at least like a thicker construction paper, if not watercolor paper. And then we're going to use some scissors at the end to cut out our hearts. And then there's optional things if you want to do, like I'm going to be using Creatology glitter pins, or I've got this fun rainbow set of markers from Creatology, as well as things like sequins or pom-poms, rhinestones, anything like that you could use to decorate your hearts as well. So I'm going to flip my camera around so you guys can see my hands, and we'll get started. And as we get started here, if you have any questions, as we said at the beginning as well, definitely feel free to put that in the Q&A and let us know how we can answer any questions you might have. All right, let's set these aside. One other note, we're going to go through how to watercolor, of course, right now, but it might take a little while for your paper to fully dry. So if your paper isn't dry in time by the end of the class to cut the hearts out, you can just follow along the last couple of steps of how to do that once your paper is dry. Okay, so I'm opening up my watercolor set here. And see here, mine, of course, I've used multiple times. And sometimes if you use it as the water dries, it can leave little crack marks. So that's what all these little lines are, just little cracks in the paint. It doesn't hurt the paint. So if yours has little cracks or anything like that as well, it's totally normal. And the fun thing about using watercolors is they're really easy to mix and match. And you can always take each of these little strips out, and you can use this actual little the like plastic palette in here as a place to mix colors as well. So that's always an option if you want to mix and match colors. Okay, so the first thing with watercolor is your brush, and I have got a few different ones here. For our hearts, we are just doing like kind of big abstract watercolor brush strokes. So I don't have any detail brushes that I'm using today, but you could use a smaller brush if you want to. I'm just going to use this like rounded bristle brush to start with. I'm going to dip that into my water here. And I'm dripping a little bit of the water, the excess water off on the edge of my jar of water here, just so it's not so drippy. You want a good amount of saturation though, especially at first, to get water into the paint pods. So I'm going to start with like a pink color, and I'm going to just drop that water that's on my brush directly into the paint, and then kind of swirl your brush around. It kind of loosens up the paint and gets that nice and wet so that you can start to collect the actual pigment on the brush tip. And then you can just take that brush and put it right onto your paper. And again, I'm just doing like big sweeping brush strokes. You Can do smaller little details if you want to, like I said, but I'm kind of start with like big sweepy brushes marks, and then I'll come back in with extra colors and more water to create more of like a little pooling of water, and that will leave like really pretty marks in our watercolor. So watercolor is pretty transparent. So you can see through it still. It's not going to be as solid as say like a acrylic paint, something that's going to really be um, opaque and kind of cover things up. But the fun thing about watercolors that's different is that it's also really easy to layer. So you can mix a lot of different colors in, or you can keep layering more layers of the same color to darken it and bring like a bolder color forward. And as we start to add more and more colors on here, you'll see it's starting to absorb quickly. The watercolor paper does. So even already here, there's a little bit of drying that's just starting. It's less pooling, and you can kind of start to see a little bit of this like little dots of color almost mixed in there. And that's how that will kind of finish out once it dries. And anywhere that you leave bigger pools of paint, like in this corner where it's starting to kind of pool together, that will definitely be a darker portion. And it will also kind of leave a little, like almost like water rings wherever there's pooling or puddling. They have like a finished one here they did earlier too, just so we have some extra ones that are already dry at the end. So you can see anywhere that there's going to be pools of water, it will leave these really pretty like abstract marks on your paper. And so again, I'm kind of just doing the first coat here, mixing in mostly all just pink to start with, and then I'm going to layer in more colors on top. You can also leave little areas, like maybe I'll leave this little stripe here of white, and then I can fill in with another color. All right, I'm going to rinse my brush out pretty thoroughly here. Again, kind of just wiping the brush on the edge of my jar of water. And then we can add in some yellow. You could do blue, purple, red, any color that you might want. So you can see like the tip of my brush is turning yellow there. That's what you want as you are getting more water on your brush or more color on your brush. You want to make sure that it's getting nice and saturated in color. And then I can add that in. Again, just kind of doing big sweeping brush strokes. And then you can start to, now that we kind of have like a base of color on here, you can start by keeping a little more water on your brush instead of kind of dragging it along the side. Have bigger portions and kind of drop water into an area to create more of a pool. Wherever there's like water kind of sitting, you can just dab your brush full of paint and just kind of drip it in there, and you'll start to see it all spread and move and mingle, which is really fun about watercolor. It just kind of moves on its own. I'm just going over my pink portions a little bit more to darken up some areas. We're of course going to cut this artwork up at the end to make our hearts. So that's just doing like big abstract portions, then we can cut smaller portions that we like into our heart shapes. And that will make sure every heart is unique and different. Instead of cutting the hearts out first, this kind of gives you more of a loose print on each one. You can see instead of like, if you were to do the hearts first, sometimes that would just leave you making sure that you had it all within your surface, where afterward you can see we're cutting it up and it will be fun little prints all mixed throughout. And as things are starting to move and pool, as you add more water, things of that sort, if you do feel like you aren't liking an area, like this feels like a very harsh line to me, I'm just gonna move that water around with my brush. And just kind of dab, swirl the color so that it leaves more of an abstract or looser line than being such like a harsh line. And I'm not worrying about going all the way to the edge of my paper. You can see I'm kind of keeping it away from the edge a little bit. Since we are cutting this up at the end, then I'm not too worried about that. Okay, I'm going to let this one start to dry a little bit. We're going to do a second one in some different colors. I'm going to tear out another sheet of my watercolor paper. And another trick you can do with watercolor is while you have those pools, you can actually lift up your paper and you can move, you can see all that color moving around if you want to mix them a little bit more. Kind of creates a little bit more marbling, or you can just let it sit flat and the color will dry where you left it. Okay, for the second one here, I'm going to do some cooler colors like blues and purples. So I'm going to start with some purple. The same way we did before, dip your brush into some water and then kind of drop all that water into your paint color to moisten it. And then you can kind of swirl your brush around to pick up all that pigment. And then again, we're just going to do like big strokes of color. And hopefully you guys are getting similar effects on your end at home. Watercolor is one of my favorite types of paint because there's very little you can do wrong with it. It's very easy to change it, add more color. You can use a paper towel or even a clean wet brush to take color away. So if you feel like, oh, I have too much here, you can take a paper towel and you can dab up the color and blot it away. And you can edit your painting that way, which is really fun. It's nice when you feel like you don't have to worry about making a mistake, which in crafting, there's really no such thing anyways. Again, so I'm just going big brush strokes, and then we'll fill in with more color and more layers. I'm gonna mix in some darker royal blue as well. And I'm purposely pushing it right into the purple paint so it immediately starts to kind of blend together. Oftentimes for Valentine's Day, traditional colors are usually pink and red and things like that, but I think you can make your Valentines into any colors that you want, whether it's your favorite colors or maybe you're making Valentines for a certain friend or family member. Then you can make these hearts in their favorite colors instead of just traditional shades. And now I'm just picking up more of the blue paint. I'm kind of just dropping it on top of the purple in little dabs, and it will all start to spread out. Mix in a little bit of light blue as well. And with our first one here, we did pretty much just pink and yellow. With this one, we've got blue and purple, but you can mix in totally random extra color if you want to as well. So maybe in here you want to add a little bit of warmth. You've got all these cooler tones. You could still add in a little bit of yellow. Especially where you can see some of these areas where it's a lot more water here. All those colors are blending and it's kind of all smearing and make it really pretty like stripes of color. And if you just want to add, like I'm going to darken this area here of purple. But I already have so much water in the mix on this side and kind of a big puddle happening here, but I just want to darken it. So I'm just going to go almost to the edge without overlapping these colors. So I'm not adding more water to the puddles that already exist. I'm just kind of going around them and darkening up this purple. And like I was saying with blotting, where you kind of take some away. So you can take like a damp brush. I'm going to dry this off a little bit here, but it's clean now. I just rinsed my brush. All this color is really starting to pool so much and it feels a little bit heavy, and all those colors blending is just turning into a bit of like a brown. So I'm just going to kind of hold my brush to it and it will actually like suck up that water. Rinse it out, dab it, and do it again. And your brush will start to remove some of that water. Saying if you don't like an area, sort of like a little magic trick, you can just blot it away. And I'm just drying my brush as I take that paint off, just wiping it onto my little towel here. So now I've just cleared up that whole puddle, but if I want to add a little bit more back in, just going to take a little bit of water without making too big of a puddle and adding some purple on top. And how quickly you can totally transform your painting if you aren't happy with something. Okay, so now you can see we've got these two different paintings going. They're similar with a lot of the same sort of brush strokes and puddling and pooling that we've created, but very different colors that are happening. But as you can see, we've got big puddles of water, which is going to make it very hard to cut. So I'm going to use some of these that I made earlier. I have got a couple different colors here that these ones will turn into a version of this. Watercolor is always going to look a little bit different depending on how much water or pigment you use. So these are similar colors, but of course not exactly the same. So I would let yours fully dry before you move into cutting them. So I'm gonna just shift this out of the way. A little trick you can use to sometimes to speed up the drying time, because I would say that the waiting is the hardest part when it comes to watercolor, is that you have to wait quite a bit of time to make sure that everything dries before you want to add in more color, to make colors darker, or if you want to do something like this where we're now going to cut up the artwork to turn it into little Valentine notes. But you can use a blow dryer or a hair dryer to dry it and speed up the process. But that is obviously has air coming out. So just like as we move this around, you can see the puddles moving. The blow dryer or hair dryer will do the same thing. So you just want to make sure if you do try that tool, that might be something you want to ask an adult for help with. But you can blow dry it, but I would do it from a distance so that it's warming up the painting to dry it, but it's not so close that the air is going to start pushing your paint around. Because unless you want to do that, then it will just kind of swirl it. So especially if you're doing like a more specific painting, like a landscape or a portrait, and you have detail, if you use something like a hair dryer to dry it and hurry it up, it can blur all of your lines. All right. So next here, we've got some pre-finished and dried paintings. I'm going to take a marker from my Creatology set here, and you can draw hearts all over the front of it and then cut them out. Sometimes I like to actually draw hearts on the back, and then you kind of get a little surprise when you cut them out of where all of your colors are. And each one really has like abstract designs then. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just start drawing with my marker different hearts on the back. And you can make them as big or as small as you want. And like this one's sort of like more elongated, where it's a little bit long and skinny. You can also do more of a rounded part if you want to. I'm not too worried about the exact shapes of these. We're going to cut them all out. So the line will disappear. It'll be on the back, and you can always trim it to even them out a little bit as well. And I see Lacey's question here. How do you make those abstract lines? So you're talking about, thinking you're talking about some of these little lines in here on the painting. Those are going to happen when your water dries. So as the water dries on your painting, you can see this pink one that we just made together. All my edges that are starting to dry, you're getting those little harder lines in certain areas, like here. It's going to create all those abstract lines. And that's from the pooling. So over here, where we blended it more and there's less water that was sitting for a long period of time, it's softer lines. But then in here, where we had bigger puddles sitting for a while, it's going to create those contrasting darker edge lines. So those will all start to appear as your watercolor dries. Okay, so going back to our hearts here, now I'm just going to take my scissors, and I like to cut things kind of loosely out first, and then I go in and I cut along the line and get the detail cut. That way your hand isn't kind of fighting with that big piece of paper as you try to make little curve cuts and things like that. Right, and then we turn that over and see, got little pops of light pink coming through. We've got some of that harsher abstract line, pretty blending all through. That's why I like kind of to do them from the back. You turn them over. Each one is its own individual little painting and a fun little surprise. When I like the pink and yellow together, feels like a little sunset. And then once we cut out some of these, we can decorate them, of course, and you can do different, if you want to decorate just the front of them, you can decorate both sides. Or I think what's fun is to kind of decorate the front where the watercolor is, and then you can write a message on the back. How fun from turning this, which is pretty, but can also look a little bit like a mess, into these. All right, so then we can take some of our details like glitter glue pins. I love these guys. Gives you the glitter without the mess. And you can draw things, you can do little polka dots. A little tip is stuck in here. My little tip is stuck inside the cap. Screw that back on. But you can use the glitter pin itself to write things if you want to. Maybe you want to write love. I'm going to write it in cursive. You can also do it in just print. And then that will dry. Right now you can see the glitter pin is kind of thick and raised, but it will dry flat when it's done and just leave a really pretty little glitter in its wake. And so then of course I'd let that fully dry before you flip it over to write a message or a note on the back. Can also do things like little glitter polka dots. I'm just squeezing out a little bit at a time to make a little dot. You can mix and match, maybe add a little bit of gold. These little dots. And then we can also do like some sequins or rhinestones. Got a whole bunch of sequins here from Michaels. And you can actually use the glitter glue pin because it is actual glue. Could use some to glue on your sequins even, and if a little bit of this comes through, just as a little bit more glitter, which is always fine. And to do little dots, similarly like we just did for the polka dots. And then reaching here, somebody's got mixed up. And then I'm going to take my sequin and pop it right on top of the little glitter dot I just made. And sequins do have sort of a front and a back. They're sort of like a little cup shape. So they do have a flatter side and then more of an indented side. So I always like to put the flatter side down. That's why I love sequins. Look at all that little shine that it gives it. So cute. You can also just do a couple little sequins. You don't have to cover the whole thing in polka dotted sequins if you don't want to. You could just do like a little cluster of them in the corner, or just little glitter dots in the corner as well. Other options, of course, you can just use your marker and markers or colored pencils, and you can just write little notes. You can write little XOXO. And then on the back, you can write little messages and say like Happy Valentines or Happy V-Day. And then I would do the same on the backs of the other ones as they dry as well. We can play with this one as well. That's similar in colors to what we did here. Again, can flip it over and draw some hearts. These out. We have a pretty purple heart. how all of these look so different. They're all have fun, different abstract lines. Some have more blending in it, some have more puddling in it. That's what's so fun about watercolor is that every piece is a little bit different. Okay, let's add some more glitter to some of these. To kind of tie into the colors that are already happening here. So especially this one's got a nice little pop of this like brighter blue in the corner. I'm going to add some little blue XO in glitter. Then maybe just some little polka dots on the front. This color sort of a light lavender, so when it dries, it'll blend in really nicely with this whole color palette of the heart. Look at all these colors in our marker set as well, and you can pick different colors to play with. Your darker blue. Write your cute little messages, and then you can even take some glitter after you write if you want to. You could then take some glitter and you could do little dots or little marks on the words. So you'll have little cute little drops of glitter on your message. And there you have all sorts of fun ideas and ways to decorate your hearts for Valentine's Day. And you'll be ready to gift these to friends and family this Valentine's Day coming up. So wait for all of your watercolors to dry, your glitter to dry, and then your little Valentine notes will be ready. Thanks so much for crafting with me and Michael's, and we'll see you soon. Happy Valentine's Day.